The CEO thought he was humiliating just another cleaner, but what he didn't know was that the woman he mocked had someone watching. Someone whose very presence could shatter his empire in seconds. The office looked perfect from the outside. Tall glass windows reflected the city skyline. Employees in crisp suits walked briskly through the corridors, carrying laptops, folders, and steaming cups of coffee. To a stranger, it seemed like a place where professionalism and success lived side by side. But for those who did the quiet, thankless work, the office wasn't flawless at all. Behind the polished image was a harsh truth. In one corner of the open space, a woman knelt on the floor with a mop in her hand. Her uniform was plain, her shoes worn, and her eyes carried the weight of exhaustion. Her name was Maria. Day after day she scrubbed floors, dusted desks, and collected trash, while people in fine suits passed her by as if she were invisible. Maria never complained. She worked with dignity, keeping her head down. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. She needed the job. It was the only way to secure a roof for her family and put food on the table. At the top floor of the office sat the man everyone feared, Mr. Carlton, the CEO. He was a tall, imposing figure with expensive suits, polished shoes, and a voice that could cut through silence like glass shattering. Carlton thrived on power. He enjoyed watching people tremble in front of him. For him, authority wasn't just part of his role, it was a performance, and humiliation was his favorite act. On that morning, Maria quietly polished the marble tiles near his desk. Carlton glanced at her from his towering chair. His eyes were sharp, full of disdain, as if her presence alone dirtied the room. He was waiting, always waiting for the slightest mistake. And then it happened. Maria, focused on her work, accidentally nudged a glass perched too close to the edge of the desk. It slipped, fell to the ground, and shattered into glittering shards. The sound echoed across the office. Every head turned. A silence swept over the room, followed by muffled whispers. Carlton rose from his chair, his lips curling into a smile that carried no warmth. It was the smile of a man who had been handed an excuse to unleash cruelty. He walked slowly toward her, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor, each step heavier than the last. "You useless woman," he sneered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Can't you even handle the simplest job?" Maria froze. Her hands trembled as she tried to gather the broken pieces, but her eyes refused to meet his. "Stand up," Carlton barked, his voice booming across the office. "You're nothing but a lazy, incapable burden. You don't belong here." Some employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few lowered their eyes, unable to bear the sight. But no one spoke. No one dared. Their jobs, their paychecks were more important than justice. Carlton wasn't finished. His cruelty had only begun. On the corner of his desk stood an unopened bottle of red wine, a gift from a client. Without hesitation, Carlton grabbed it, uncorked it, and in one swift motion poured the dark liquid over Maria's head. Gasps rippled through the room. The wine cascaded down her hair, soaking her uniform, dripping onto the floor. Maria squeezed her eyes shut as humiliation burned her skin. The sharp scent of alcohol filled her nostrils, mixing with the bitter taste of shame. A couple of employees let out nervous laughter. Others shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. But Carlton? He was enjoying it. He stood there, arms crossed, as if he were a king in a theater, and Maria his unwilling performer. Maria wanted to speak, to beg him to stop, but her throat was locked. She thought of her children, of the bills waiting at home. She thought of her husband, away on duty, unaware of the abuse she endured. And she swallowed her pride, because desperation chained her voice. Carlton leaned down, his words like poison. "You should remember this," he hissed. "I feed you. And if I decide, I can throw you out on the street today." The office fell into a suffocating silence. Some workers exchanged glances, torn between fear and disgust, but still no one moved. Maria, drenched in red, knelt quietly. She reached for a rag, forcing her trembling hands to clean up the very mess that had been poured over her. Her tears mixed with the wine, but she never allowed them to fall openly. For Carlton this was victory. Another lesson in power. Another reminder that he was untouchable. But he was wrong. Someone else had been watching. From the entrance of the office, a figure stood silently. Dressed in an impeccable military uniform, his posture firm, his eyes sharp, he was a man whose presence could command a battlefield. His chest bore the marks of honor, his face carved with discipline. It was Daniel, Maria's husband. He had arrived earlier than expected, hoping to surprise his wife, but instead what he found froze his heart. He saw her on her knees, drenched, trembling, humiliated by the man who dared to call himself powerful. For a moment, Daniel did not move. He stood still, but inside a fire raged. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched, and in his eyes, fury simmered like a storm waiting to break. Maria turned her head slightly and saw him. Her lips quivered, her chest tightened with both shame and relief. She wanted to run to him, but her body refused. She was trapped by humiliation. The room hadn't noticed him yet. Carlton continued his cruel performance, raising his voice to make his authority echo across the office. "Look at her," Carlton shouted, spreading his arms. "This is what happens when people like her are allowed into a place of prestige." Some employees chuckled nervously. Others sank deeper into their chairs. But the show was about to end. Because Daniel, the silent soldier, took a single step forward. The sharp echo of his boot against the marble floor silenced the whispers. Heads turned. Employees froze. A wave of unease spread through the room. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The office, once filled with mocking laughter, now trembled with an unfamiliar weight. Maria's tears glistened, her heart pounding with both fear and hope. Carlton, too absorbed in his performance, had not yet realized that the stage no longer belonged to him. The true reckoning was only beginning. The sound of Daniel's boot echoed like thunder in the silent office. Every pair of eyes shifted to him, though Carlton still had not noticed. The CEO was too drunk on his own arrogance, waving his hands as if he were a performer in front of an audience. "Look closely," Carlton declared, his voice full of venom. "This is the fate of incompetence. If you cannot obey, if you cannot serve with perfection, you are nothing. Less than nothing." The employees sat frozen. Some wanted to look away, others wanted to protest, but fear chained them to their chairs. The only movement came from Daniel. His steps were slow, deliberate, each one carrying the weight of authority, each one sending a tremor through the marble floor. Finally, Carlton turned. His eyes narrowed at the sight of the man in uniform. The metals glinted under the office lights, and for a fleeting second, uncertainty flickered across his face. But arrogance returned quickly, hiding the small crack in his confidence. "And who," Carlton sneered, "are you to interrupt me? Do you not see that I am in the middle of a lesson? This woman must understand her place." A murmur ran through the office. Some gasped, others covered their mouths. Because even before Daniel spoke, they felt the storm in his presence. Daniel's gaze was unflinching. He looked at Carlton the way a commander looks at a reckless recruit, or a judge at a guilty man. His voice, when it came, was low but carried more power than Carlton's shouting. "Be careful," Daniel said slowly. "That woman is my wife." The words cut through the air like a blade. Silence fell so heavy that even breathing felt like thunder. Maria's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Daniel with both fear and relief, her heart torn between shame for what he had seen and gratitude that he was here now. Carlton blinked, caught off guard for a moment, but quickly forced a laugh. A thin, nervous sound disguised as confidence. "So what if she is your wife?" he replied, his lips curling into a mocking grin. "This uniform of yours may impress others, but in my company, it holds no value. Here, money and contracts are the only authority. Not medals. Not titles. Not soldiers." The arrogance in his tone drew uncomfortable shuffles among the employees. Even those who had once feared Carlton now looked uneasy. They knew he was going too far, but still no one dared to speak. Daniel's eyes did not waver. He took another step forward, the rhythm of his boot echoing once more. His jaw tightened, and his voice dropped into something colder. "You have poured wine over her head, humiliated her, broken her dignity in front of everyone. And yet you laugh." His voice was steady, but beneath it lay a restrained fury, the kind that made the bravest men tremble. Carlton smirked, though the tremor in his hands betrayed him. He stepped closer to Maria, pointing a finger at her as if she were nothing but an object. "She's worthless," Carlton spat. "A nuisance. If she wishes to stay here, she must obey. If not, she can walk out into the street where she belongs. That is how I run my company. My rules. My power." The words landed heavy in the room. Maria lowered her head, her fists clenched tightly, as if trying to hold together the pieces of her breaking soul. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks. The employees exchanged uneasy looks, whispers flowing again. Some of them could barely believe the cruelty unfolding. Yet none dared to rise. Until Daniel moved. Another step forward. His voice now rose, still calm but carrying the sharp edge of command. "Enough," he said. The word echoed like a gunshot. The office fell into silence again. Every heart beat faster. Carlton chuckled bitterly, arms crossed, trying to mask his fear. You think you can come in here and tell me how to run my company? This is my world. My rules. Do not mistake your military games for authority here. Daniel's eyes narrowed. His voice hardened. You misunderstand, he said. I'm not playing games. I'm not just a soldier. I am an officer of this region. I command men, I command respect, and I answer to no tyrant in a suit. I've seen many like you, men who believe they are untouchable. And I have seen every single one of them fall. Gasps filled the air. The employees leaned closer, their fear of Carlton suddenly clashing with an emerging respect for Daniel. Carlton's smirk faltered. His arrogance cracked, if only for a second. He tried to laugh it off, but his voice shook. You threaten me in my own office? I do not threaten, Daniel replied. I state truth. Respect cannot be bought. Power built on fear collapses with the first breath of courage. Maria raised her eyes for the first time. They shimmered with tears, but also with a spark of something new, hope. Carlton turned to his employees, desperate to regain control. You all owe me your jobs. You all owe me obedience. This man comes in here and dares to. But before he could finish, two employees stepped forward. Their voices were shaky but steady enough to break the silence. Sir, we've seen you do this before, one said quietly. You've humiliated others. You've crossed the line too many times. Another added, it's true. This isn't leadership. It's abuse. The room filled with murmurs, different now, bolder, braver. Carlton's mask began to crack. Daniel's hand clenched into a fist, but he held himself back. He walked over to Maria, bent down, and gently helped her to her feet. His arm wrapped around her, lifting her up, shielding her from the eyes that had once judged her. It was a gesture simple yet powerful, restoring the dignity Carlton had tried to destroy. The office held its breath. Carlton, pale now, took a small step back. Daniel looked straight into his eyes. His voice, calm but resolute, sealed the moment. You humiliated her in front of everyone. But today it is you who stands exposed. Your mask has shattered. The fear that once held this office silent is gone. And soon your power will vanish with it. The room trembled, not with fear this time, but with something stronger, courage. Carlton's reign was cracking before everyone's eyes. And Daniel had only just begun. The office was still. Every heartbeat seemed louder than words. Carlton, the once untouchable CEO, now stood face to face with a man whose calm presence carried more weight than all his shouting. The smirk on Carlton's lips trembled, though he tried to hide it behind arrogance. Daniel stood firm, his arm wrapped protectively around Maria. She leaned against him, still trembling, her uniform soaked with wine, her dignity bruised but not broken. His voice, when it returned, carried not only strength but an undeniable authority that silenced even the faintest whisper. You believe yourself powerful because no one here has stood against you, Daniel said, his eyes locked on Carlton. But power built on fear is fragile. Strip away fear and you have nothing. Carlton laughed harshly, though the sound came hollow. And you think you can strip me of it? This is my empire. My name is on the walls, my money pays their salaries. Without me they are nothing. Daniel's jaw tightened. No. Without them you are nothing. A king without subjects is not a king. He is only a man in a chair pretending to rule. The employees stirred. Heads rose. Eyes that had been downcast now fixed on Carlton with a mixture of anger and realization. The cracks in his authority widened. Carlton's face flushed red. He pointed a trembling finger at Daniel. You will regret this. Uniform or not, this is my company. I decide who stays, who leaves. I decide who eats, who starves. And as for her, he jabbed his finger toward Maria, she is worthless, a distraction, a parasite. She doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as us. Gasps filled the office. Maria's body shook, her heart collapsing under the weight of his venom. But Daniel's grip on her tightened, steadying her. He took a step forward, forcing Carlton backward. The echo of his boot against the floor was like a drumbeat of judgment. You will not speak of her that way again, Daniel said, his voice cold as steel. Carlton's arrogance faltered. His eyes darted around the room, seeking allies. But instead of support, he found hesitation, discomfort, even quiet defiance. The employees no longer looked at him with fear, they looked at him with disgust. And then a voice rose from the back. I've seen him do this to others too, said a woman in a gray suit, her voice shaking but determined. I've watched colleagues humiliated until they quit. Another man added, he's treated us like tools, not people. We stayed quiet out of fear. But today we see the truth. The murmur grew, swelling like a tide. Employees whispered to one another, their words carrying fragments of years of silence breaking open. Carlton slammed his fist on his desk, his voice trembling with rage. Lies. All of you are liars. Without me, none of you have a place here. Daniel did not flinch. He turned to the employees, his voice rising like a commander rallying his soldiers. Do you hear him? He believes you are nothing. He believes your value is measured only in how much you obey his cruelty. But I see differently. I see people who have worked hard, who deserve respect. I see human beings, not servants. The workers shifted, straightening their backs. For the first time in years, their fear loosened. Carlton tried to laugh again, but his voice cracked. His once booming authority sounded small, almost desperate. Don't listen to him. He doesn't understand how business works. I built this company with my own hands. I am the one who... Daniel interrupted, his voice cutting sharp. No. You built it on their backs. You built it by stepping on those who could not fight back. You think that makes you strong? Makes you weak. True leaders lift others up. Tyrants like you fall the moment the silence breaks. The murmurs became louder now. Employees nodded, some whispering words of agreement. Carlton's eyes darted, panic rising as his grip on them slipped away. Maria, though still trembling, lifted her head. Her voice was soft but steady. He humiliated me because he thought I was invisible. Because he thought I would never have the courage to speak. But today I am not invisible. Today I have a voice. Her words struck harder than any blow. The room stilled and the courage in her voice became contagious. Another employee spoke up. He made me work weekends without pay. I stayed silent because I was afraid. And he threatened to fire me when I got sick, another added. The office filled with confessions, a chorus of truths spilling into the air. Carlton's face turned pale, sweat forming on his forehead. His world, once built on silence, was collapsing with every word. Stop it, he shouted, his voice cracking. Enough. You all owe me loyalty. Without me, you are nothing. But his words no longer carried weight. They were desperate, hollow, stripped of fear's power. Daniel took out his phone, pressing a single button before raising it to his ear. His voice was calm but commanding. This is Officer Daniel Hart. Take note of this company. What I have witnessed today is abuse and misconduct. I want a full investigation. The words struck Carlton like a hammer. He staggered backward, his mouth opening and closing without sound. For the first time he looked small, just a man trembling, powerless. Maria looked at her husband, her tears now mixed with relief. His hand on hers felt like a lifeline, pulling her from the pit of humiliation back into the light of dignity. You thought pouring wine over her would break her, Daniel said, his voice steady, his eyes piercing Carlton. But all you've done is expose yourself. And now, the very people you believed you controlled see you for what you truly are. Carlton's shoulders slumped. The fire in his eyes dimmed, replaced with panic. He looked around desperately, but every face he met was cold, unyielding. The fear he had ruled with was gone. Maria's voice rose again, firmer now. Respect cannot be bought with money. Power cannot excuse cruelty. Today everyone sees the truth. The office was silent, but not out of fear, out of reverence. Carlton stood paralyzed, cornered not by force but by truth. For years he had believed himself untouchable. But in a matter of minutes his empire had cracked. And the final blow was yet to come. The office no longer belonged to Carlton. The man who once towered over his employees with threats and humiliation now stood exposed, stripped of the fear that had always protected him. His suit, once a symbol of control, now looked like a costume on a man who had lost the stage. Daniel lowered his phone but did not take his eyes off him. His voice was steady, calm, unshaken. You thought yourself untouchable. But respect is not commanded through cruelty. It is earned through character. And today yours is laid bare for everyone to see. Carlton's lips quivered. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His gaze darted desperately around the office, searching for a supporter. But everywhere he turned, he found only silence, silence heavy with judgment, silence that condemned him louder than words ever could. Maria, still standing beside her husband, straightened her shoulders. The wine-stained uniform clung to her body, her hair matted, her face streaked with tears. Yet there was something in her eyes now that no humiliation could erase: resolve. For years she had carried herself quietly, enduring whispers, ignoring contempt, surviving insults. But now, in front of the same people who once overlooked her, she finally spoke. You called me worthless, she said, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger with every word. You poured wine on me as if I was beneath you. You laughed as if my pain was entertainment. But today I stand here not as your cleaner, not as your victim, but as a woman with dignity no one can steal. The words rippled through the room. Her co-workers who had once bowed their heads, now lifted them high. Their eyes met hers with respect, with admiration. Daniel's grip on her hand tightened, grounding her. Carlton shook his head furiously, his arrogance trying to cling to life. This is madness. You all need me. I am this company. A man in the back stood. His voice was firm. No. We are this company. Without us you have nothing. A wave of agreement followed. More voices rose, employees speaking truths they had buried for years. The long hours, the insults, the threats, the culture of fear. Each word was another crack in the empire Carlton had built. The CEO's face went pale. His authority, once absolute, dissolved before his eyes. Daniel stepped forward again, his voice cutting sharp. Enough. This ends now. The authorities will investigate. And whether you admit your guilt or not, your reign of abuse is over. Carlton staggered backward, his hands trembling. He reached for his desk as though its polished surface could anchor him. But the room had already judged him guilty. For the first time in years Maria felt no fear. She turned fully toward him, her voice steady. You said I had no right to be here. But today I realize it was you who never deserved this place. Power without respect is empty. And respect without dignity is worthless. A hush fell. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade, leaving only her words hanging in the air like scripture. Carlton slumped into his chair, broken, silent. The arrogance was gone. All that remained was a man exposed, smaller than anyone had ever realized. Daniel placed his arm gently around Maria's shoulders. His voice softened, but it carried through the room. You never know who you are humiliating. Behind every uniform, behind every simple dress, behind every tired face, there is a life, a story, a strength you cannot see. Appearances deceive. But dignity is unshakable. The employees bowed their heads, not out of fear but out of reverence. Some even clapped softly, a ripple of quiet defiance that grew into a wave of applause. It was not for Daniel, nor for authority, it was for Maria. For her courage, for her strength, for the truth spoken aloud at last. Tears blurred Maria's vision. But this time they were not tears of humiliation. They were tears of release, of freedom, of victory. Daniel guided her toward the exit, every step a march away from the ashes of cruelty. The employees parted, creating a path, their eyes filled with newfound respect. As Maria passed, some whispered apologies, others nodded deeply. She did not need their words, their eyes said everything. At the door Maria paused. She turned back one last time, her voice carrying the final verdict. True power is not in the hands of those who rule with fear. True power is in the hearts of those who endure, who rise, who refuse to be broken. The office fell into absolute silence. Carlton lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. He was defeated, not by force, not by authority, but by the truth he could no longer deny. Daniel opened the door, and together he and Maria stepped out, leaving behind the world of glass and shadows. Outside the sun was bright. The city roared with life, indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded. But for Maria, everything felt lighter. For the first time in years, her steps carried not just exhaustion but pride. Daniel looked at her, his eyes soft. You were stronger than him long before I walked in. Maria smiled faintly, her voice breaking with emotion. Maybe, but today I finally believed it. He kissed her forehead gently and they walked on side by side, no longer as a silent cleaner and a feared officer, but as equals bound by dignity, respect, and love. Back in the office, the employees stood in silence. The echo of Maria's words lingered in the air, changing something inside each of them. They had witnessed cruelty, but they had also witnessed courage. And they would never forget it. Carlton remained behind his desk, alone. His empire of fear had collapsed in a single day. The office no longer trembled at his voice. The walls that once amplified his arrogance now echoed with his defeat. He buried his face in his hands, realizing too late the truth he had refused to see. You never know who is watching. You never know whose strength you underestimate. And you never know when your mask of power will shatter. Respect is not measured by wealth, titles, or authority. It is measured by how you treat those who seem to have nothing. Because dignity, once trampled, will rise again, and when it does, it reveals who the truly powerful are.